edition of FinCrime Insiders. I'm your host, Skylar Palmer, and I'm here with my esteemed colleague, Lauren Schaefer, and our special guest this afternoon, Nathan Vallejos. We're excited to be talking about all things financial crimes compliance. You can look forward to hearing Nathan answer 5 questions, ranging from details about his professional background to interesting investigations he has conducted. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone watching or listening that the views and opinions expressed on FinCrime Insiders are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of their past, current, or future employers. Any content provided by our webcast hosts or participants are of their opinion and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, or anyone or anything. And now, without further ado, let's get this episode started. Lauren, welcome back. We're happy to have you again. The last episode you weren't here. You were out gallivanting around on vacation or something.
Yes, I'm excited, and I'm excited to talk to Nathan. So if we want to jump in, Nathan, to a little bit about your background and yourself, your professional background. So what is your job title and what type of institution are you at?
Thank you both for having me on here. So to start off, I am currently a Global Sanctions Analyst at a mid-sized US-based financial institution. It is primarily a commercial bank that I work at, and so I deal a lot more with businesses. I've been in the industry for about 4 years now. I originally started in the AML sector and worked on alerts and investigations before moving into a KYC and then increasingly sanctions role. And before that, finally, where I currently work, it turned into a full-time sanctions role. This is actually the smallest bank I've worked at. The other banks I've worked at are significantly larger in size.
Okay.
So,
in your OFAC role now, what is the structure of your team and what do your scope of responsibilities look like?
So our sanctions team structure pretty similar to how AML team structures are. Kind of the major difference is that almost all the team members are going to be doing the same tasks regardless. So in this case, you'll probably give more larger, more complex cases to more senior analysts or senior members of the team, but everyone's going to be monitoring and conducting and doing investigations and watching for sanctions related things on the same schedule. Sanctions as well is a lot more fast-paced and much more in real time compared to AML or KYC. So we're going to be dealing with a lot of live transactions and other things like that. So very fast-paced and pretty teamwork in a sense in that.
So do you guys have a triage portion or section of your team, and then analysts, or do you guys all kind of triage and then work those cases or alerts?
So everyone's basically going to be a triage specialist or analyst. So everyone's going to be watching for potential alerts, and as needed, a more junior analyst will probably, if they don't feel comfortable or want a further recommendation, they'll escalate it to a more senior member or to the manager when they have concerns. So, and it's generally how it goes. Most of the time, though, it's going to be that everyone's just going to triage on their own. So escalations are somewhat, they occur sometimes, but it's not the most common thing. Usually you identify a true match or a concern and you deal with it right then and there.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And these alerts you're referencing, these are based off of wire transactions and ACH transactions, correct?
So it's going to be any and all transactions and sanctions. Sanctions apply very broadly, and any U.S.-based entity and any other entities that have any association with the United States are subject to sanctions. So that means that when a bank is screening for things, they have to cast a very wide net. So lots of things are going to be screened, but our main purview is going to be around transactions.
Okay. And obviously the originator and the beneficiary of those transactions, institutions even where it comes from, stuff like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious.
Another big one.
Yep.
Another big one as well is going to be wire notes. You're going to see those also be screened, and that's one that usually surprises a lot of people, and they don't realize that is that any memos or verbiage, or as it's also known, OBI, will be screened as well in sanctions. Like I said, everything is screened.
Yeah, yeah. Now, have you worked, in an OFAC capacity at a larger institution? Because you said this is the smallest institution you worked at, but I know you worked other roles elsewhere. Just curious if you have, how that kind of has related.
So yeah, so on my prior position was at a very large financial institution that did have significant sanctions exposure, especially because I was working there at the start of the Russian-Ukrainian war. So when I was working in that role, I was working in KYC, and it quickly turned into a KYC and sanctions role a couple months in because we had to do full reviews of any Russian-related clients at that time. So major events like that and sanctions have changed things around, and that's kind of where I got my foot in the door in terms of sanctions wise, is kind of coming from the KYC side, where you have to be like, okay, are we still able to bank this person or not? This Russian entity or this Ukrainian entity, like what's going on here? Are we okay? Like, do we need to offboard them immediately or lock down the funds? And so that's where it came into. And then I moved further into sanctions because it interested me. So
Okay, that was kind of gonna be my next little follow-up, was of the roles you've held and responsibilities that you've worked. Where does OFAC sit in that between KYC, traditional transaction monitoring, things like that? This is something that piques your interest the most, or is it just something because it's newer to you, you're still diving into it, learning it all?
so I mean, like transaction monitoring and sanctions and all that, sanctions is going to be like a little bit of everything. So you're going to have some KYC involved. Most of it is going to be more based on transaction monitoring, but you're going to, like I said, have all elements of various things. There's going to be some AML stuff as well, of course. I mean, very connected, but I feel like KYC is probably going to be the closest one in terms of sanctions. It's a good like stepping point. Um, Fraud also has a lot of similar work as well in terms of like the type of transaction monitoring and the real-time work that they do for the most part. But sanctions is pretty unique in the sense that it's really like foreign policy work and more along those lines compared to the others. Like sanctions aren't mere bank policy regulations; they're foreign policy regulations. So as I mentioned again, all U.S. individuals and related entities are required to comply. So it does require a pretty broad reviews.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for sharing about yourself, your experience, and how much of a professional you are. Great to have you on here. We're excited to have somebody else different than the AML side of things. So thanks for taking the time here. We'll move on to question 2. What are some trends that you yourself or your team or even your institutions noticing in regard to the OFAC sanctions, things like that?
So I feel like the best way to probably put this will be to describe it in terms of the major international events that have occurred over the past few years, because those are where most of the trends are basically originating from. And right now, that would be obviously the Russian-Ukrainian war, the Israel-Gaza war, and then also the opioid crisis with fentanyl and all that. So kind of starting off with the big one, which is the Russian-Ukrainian war. The big trend we're seeing right now there is the third-party country risk and third-party sanctions evasion. So this is effectively going to be utilizing a third country, so shipping goods or money or other things to places like the UAE, Malaysia, India, or China, among others, and then transporting them to Russia. So you only see like half the transaction that's occurring. You watch funds or supplies move to these countries, and then we don't see what happens once they get there, and then they get moved to another thing. So this has become a significant concern for banks and then the government as well, who have very much been increasingly aggressive about pushing back against this. We recently saw actually as well executive order last month that has expanded sanctions on individuals or entities that assist in the evasion of these sanctions. So that's an area that we've been seeing concerning trends on.
Is there any specific routing of these transactions, in order to avoid that, right? You mentioned third-party countries. Is there reoccurring ones? It probably most likely is. That's why there's announcements out there on it. Just curious, in your position and in your experience, what those are.
So yeah, it's going to be places that are generally like more neutral towards both Russia and the Western world. Those are, or have a more chilly relationship with the United States, but still trade with them. These are going to be the ones that you're going to be looking more closely at. If they have previous close ties to Russia as well, is going to be a pretty strong one as well. A lot of the ex-Soviet sphere is also assisting in this. Those are going to be areas that are going to be for increased concern. It also is going to depend on your industry as well. So things if you're like a shipping company, the oil and gas sector, mining, or other like high tech or other like mechanical parts or things along those lines, those are going to be more signs to watch out for as well, or like increased trends towards that.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I've read about for instance, yeah, shipping, right, import export logistics companies where they go out into the middle of like the China Sea, and then they move a product from one ship to the next, and that's kind of how they avoid the sanctions or whatever. And like, no, this has been our ship the whole time, but really it's coming from a OFAC designated entity or a country, right?
Exactly. So, I mean, and that's what's been happening, and that's what led to these significant trends and concerns, is because their base funds or whatnot are being used to pay for these shipments, or these shipments are occurring in these countries. They move the goods off the ships, and then they move them onto a different ship and ship it to Russia. Obviously, this is happening in different countries, so as a bank, there is ways that we can fight that though, which is good. So one of the main ones, obviously, is that we can request more information. There's important like FinCEN guidelines, and they release like joint lists of various like goods to watch out for or to be aware of that are in high demand for the Russian war machine. So watching out for those and getting further questions on what the purpose of this transaction, watching for other unusual signs of what are they doing there? Have they transacted with said country before or company? Like all the typical bread and butter questions in the AML and sanction sphere are still going to apply. It's just going to be especially like adding in that additional, what type of goods? Where are the invoices? What are you doing there? Like, give us the ship name, like all that jazz. Like, that's all going to be the stuff that we're going to look for.
Okay, cool, awesome. Well, thanks for diving down that road with us. Informing folks listening what kind of red flags to look out for as far as sanctions evasion. But I guess one thing too, real quick, is can you elaborate on the different types of sanctions, right?
Absolutely. So, and I still do have a little bit about Israel and Gaza and the fentanyl crisis to also discuss as well. So, but yes, there is going to be a variety of different sanctions and that are going to be placed depending on like what OFAC's goal is. An OFAC, for those who don't know, is the Office of Foreign Asset Controls. They're part of the Department of the Treasury, and they're the administrator and enforcer of sanctions. Banks do a lot of the heavy work in terms of actually enforcing these, but they act as effectively the enforcer of the banks and other businesses and entities in making sure that people remain compliant with sanctions. But with that being said, there's a couple of different sanctions, as I was saying. The main ones being either targeted sanctions or list-based sanctions, as they're called. These are going to be what most people are going to be under. This is going to be especially targeted on the SDN list, or specially designated nationals list. These are going to be your bad and bad. So hostile foreign regime officials, narcotics traffickers, proliferators of weapons of mass destruction, terrorists, and any other individuals or entities who are hostile to the U.S.'s economic or political interests or foreign policy goals are going to be on this list. So those are going to be those ones. There's also going to be comprehensive sanctions, and these are going to be very broad sanctions placed across entire countries that block almost all transactions going to them, barring OFAC license that allows you to transact there. There's only a handful of places that are on the comprehensively sanctioned countries list: North Korea, Iran, Cuba, Syria, and then a couple of regions in Ukraine, Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk. All those you cannot transact with. In addition, there's also going to be secondary sanctions. And as mentioned, in regards to the Russian-Ukrainian war, these act the same way as SDN or list-based sanctions, but they're going to be placed on those third-party entities or countries, people who are assisting in the evasion of U.S. sanctions. And then finally, there's sectoral sanctions. And sectoral sanctions are going to be in between in terms of broadness. List-based sanctions and comprehensive sanctions, they're going to be placed across industries. So the only place that really has sectoral sanctions right now is going to be Russia, and there is a significant number of sanctions placed across there, including mining industry, the IT sector now, defense, high tech, finance, mining. All of those are going to be sectorally sanctioned, which means that if a company's dealing in those, generally that we're not going to be able to transact with them.
Is that type of sanction, like the reason behind it, is that because it's traditionally like a high revenue industry in that country, so you're trying to cut that off, right? Yeah, I guess that's what I'm asking.
Precisely. So these do pretty wide scale like damage to an economy. So they are doing this to basically block war efforts. And as Russia's economy has turned more and more towards a wartime economy to further the invasion of Ukraine, more industries on to further block the use of the Russian economy in the war in Ukraine.
Right on.
Do you guys get notified of these updates like frequently? Are they constantly updating, or do you guys kind of see in the political scheme of things like, okay, let's anticipate there's probably going to be some changes?
It's a bit of both. It's we can prepare as much as we can, and it's generally good for us to be on the lookout for, okay, what might be coming next, but we don't actually know who or what's going to be sanctioned until they're actually sanctioned. So, and I'll get a bit more into that in a little bit, but that's actually one of the major issues in dealing with sanctions related stuff that we have to deal with. So,
okay, great.
It depends, and it's both at the same time. So, but yeah, to go over real fast as well, the Israel-Gaza situation. We've kind of seen a return to terrorist financing in their bit different forms than what previously. So we're seeing a lot more use of like cryptocurrency, and then in various funds like that. Not so much use of well, can't say I haven't seen it as much, but cryptocurrency is definitely the big one. So, and then the fentanyl crisis, that's been where a lot of the sanctions in China and Mexico have been placed. So we've been seeing, especially recently, I've noticed a lot of the OFAC updates have been placed on like situations there with dealing with anti-narcotics trafficking. So those are something that I've been noticing a lot more. That have been pushing. And obviously, FinCEN also recently released further guidance on narcotics and then also timeshare problems. And those do fit into our watching for further sanctions and understanding what's going on in said funding. So,
yeah, it's definitely a lot to pay attention to, but I guess you can't get too caught up into it until it's actually officially sanctioned. So,
exactly.
Right on. All right. Lauren, go ahead. You can lead us on here to the next question.
Okay, so for question 3, is there an interesting investigation or scenario that you could give us more detail on? How did you receive it, and how did you investigation?
So I can't exactly talk about the investigations I do on that end. However, I can talk about how investigations go regarding Russian oligarchs and kind of the situation around there. I feel like that's a pretty good way to describe things since I can't give formal things. I can talk about uh, how those investigations go and kind of the situations on those. So obviously, a lot of Russian oligarchs have seen significant sanctions placed on them since the start of the war, since they're considered a lot of them are considered close allies of Vladimir Putin, or basically like close associates. They're acting as like his proxies or proxies of the Russian government through their industries. Um, so a lot of them have been sanctioned, but they still want to get money into the United States. Uh, so they have to take a much harder way now. And the way they do that is that they typically will go through multiple tax havens, places like Cyprus, Malta, Monaco, Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands. They'll create various front companies out there, things that are very hard to track. And these are places with high secrecy and are tax havens. So they can set up things easily there, and they don't really have to do anything with them. And then they'll move money through these various things, sometimes through proxies, other times through not. But they'll move them through multiple jurisdictions before they finally show up in the United States. The problem is that SBC, okay, this is coming from the Cayman Islands, but where's it really coming from? Or like, what's going on here? So in investigations, we have to uncover that full thing. So a lot of the times, because there's also a big issue identifying foreign information, especially in high secrecy jurisdictions, we have to look for other ways. So things like using the ICIJ, which is the International Journalists Consortium, that has a lot of the Panama Papers or other things in that. We can find a lot of those webs through there, or like connections, because it might show, oh, this guy is connected, or this business is connected to this person, or this Russian entity owned by an oligarch is the beneficial owner or the like only signer on for this business. And so that's a really important tool for us to use, and then further getting further ownership structures if we can, and going from there, seeing what transactional activity, generally things more like venture capital or other like investment related firms are going to be a bit more like risky in this terms, because that's where they want to put their money a lot of the times is in this stuff. So not usually so much to immediately like reap benefits and like try to steal tech from the United States, but just to make more money for themselves and then for the Russian economy as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So my thing is that like it's yeah, think about it. I mean, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, these were just allies of Putin, or they're businessmen in Russia, so it's kind of just like a flip of the switch, circumstances surrounding war, right? Obviously, nobody wants to support another country invading another country just for the fun of it. So it's definitely unique, right? The sanction space, because like you said, these are businessmen, most of them. It's unclear how they're contributing to the war, if they are really, but with the best information available to OFAC and Treasury and things like that, how do we support the effort of ending that type of conflict? That's one of the ways they do it, is they put up these blocking sanctions. But then again, these are businessmen and they want to make money, so they're going to continue to try to make money, and that's when they go out through these convoluted routes or more complicated processes in order to continue to run their business or make money.
So yeah, just on that real fast, the reason our oligarchs are sanctioned is usually two reasons. They're either very politically close to Putin and act as his economic proxies throughout Russia and throughout the rest of the world. And then their industries are also typically ones that are being utilized to power the Russian war machine. So the most infamous oligarchs and the ones that are most commonly sanctioned, which is most of them at this point, but they're going to be along the oil and gas, energy, defense, finance, really any of those again that are going to be making money or weaponry or other things for Russia to continue its invasion of Ukraine.
Related to those scenarios around the Russian oligarchs and stuff, have you had like good training on that, or does OFAC like have tips and tricks on their website of the websites that you go to to help do the investigations?
A lot of it's gonna honestly be like self-exposure. Like I'm lucky that I already deal with KYC and EDD experience, so I know where to go and where to dig deep down. But that's kind of that is one of the bigger issues in dealing with sanctions is the OFAC provides a lot of information in terms of like who this person is, who are they, like can like who they are, like close associates are usually sanctioned as well, or like noted dates of birth and other associations. But we don't get a lot of information on like maybe like that second ring of associates, like people who are not like closest family members or like really tight knit business partners, but still like close business partners or like a bit like cousins or aunts and uncles or things like that. We don't necessarily have that information, and it can't always be it isn't always readily available to us. So that's one of the major problems or kind of concerns looking at it, is that how do we get this information and how can we make these determinations? So there's not a lot of training on that, unfortunately. It's one of those where you have to keep on digging. I recommend getting some KYC experience and kind of understanding how the research is done there and kind of the dig downs, and you can apply that to sanctions really well as well. So
Ownership structures, I feel like probably are a main thing to focus on. Once you understand beneficial ownership of companies, then you can kind of unravel that web. And I personally, my favorite is SEC filings, because publicly traded companies more common, because they have to disclose those things, ownership, who owns X amount of the company. But even sometimes, if it is just a private venture fund, there's still going to be some trades, some sales or purchases of shares within that private joint stock company. And sometimes you'll see the signator at the bottom of those SEC filings is a person's name and not a lawyer. And you're like, oh, okay. So then that's kind of your insight there. But that's personally my favorite is SEC filings.
I definitely agree on that. Shout out to Form ADVs.
Yeah.
Those are absolutely an excellent tool to utilize for both any KYC, AML, or sanctions purposes, because for publicly traded companies, you can see how much an entity or individual owns of a company and who all the beneficial owners are, and then you can kind of track from there and go down the line.
Yep.
It might be a bit harder once you get outside of the United States, but oftentimes as well, I mean, if you're working in the space, you generally have the power to ask for further information. So you can get further drill downs or ask for a larger beneficial ownership form and to better understand like what the full like situation is there, and kind of that can help to connect the dots. So
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Real quick, I'm putting you on the spot. There's an ACAMS question on the exam. It's about the secondary reach of OFAC and Treasury, basically saying how, as you alluded to earlier, that if a person has any sort of association with a U.S. bank, although they're not a U.S. national, we have an overextended arm reach to engage that individual or that entity and say, nope, we're freezing your assets. That gives us control by what's the keyword or term that they use?
you would be talking about extraterritoriality.
Yeah, there we go. All
Totality.
right, this guy knows what he's talking about. I love it. All right, awesome.
But
Quick.
yeah, that reach
Good job, Nathan.
and the size of U.S. sanctions, the size of the U.S. economy and population is what makes U.S. sanctions ultra effective. Huge amount of the world's financial system is based here, and most countries are going to want to deal with the United States for trade purposes because 330 million people and the world's largest economy is a pretty nice thing to deal with in terms of
Yeah,
making
look
money.
at wearing the flag right here. That's right. America's #1.
Exactly. So it makes people compliant because they want to trade with the U.S. and also they don't want sanctions to be placed on themselves, um, which is a huge deterrent as well. Is because if you're helping Russia or other sanctioned actors abroad, you can have sanctions placed on yourself, and then bam, there goes any sort of connection to the U.S. Is gone, and then you can't do anything with the U.S. And I mean that's not good for business.
Or at least it'll be much harder.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Awesome. Great. Loving the conversation already. Super stoked to be learning more from you, Lauren. Hopefully you learned something there. SEC filings, man. I'm telling you. We'll
Yeah,
move
no,
on.
I agree with that. I've seen them, and I have pictured like the KYC stuff and looking at the beneficial ownership, and yeah, that would make sense if that would be some of the best supporting docs to like find connections and all that. So just solidifies good info.
Yep. Exactly. All right, Nathan. We'll move on here to question 4. I'm sure you're eager to answer this. You kind of alluded to it earlier too. In regard to any of your experience, what is an issue or obstacle that's impacted you, your team, or institution the most in regard of your ability to do your job efficiently, effectively?
So I probably have quite a bit on this because this is something I've thought about quite a bit. What issues? Because I like to improve things. So kind of the core one in sanctions that causes people a lot of hassle is the speed or like the fast-paced nature of sanctions. Sanctions are immediately applied the second that OFAC deploys updates or announces that said entity or parties have been sanctioned. So we are required to comply immediately. And especially in recent years, this has become a much more complex situation with the advent of sectoral sanctions, or in the opposite case, we've seen loosening of regulations in Cuba. And so those have created more complex webs that we have to deal with on a quick manner, in a quick manner. And that's not always possible or easy to like comprehend because sanctions, when like executive orders or general licenses are put out, they're legal documents and they're very open to interpretation. And so that creates a big issue of, is my or our interpretation correct compared to yours or his, or another businesses or entities or individuals or OFACs, which is the one that we're really most concerned about. And that can be tricky because there's going to be a lot of gray area. A great example again recently is metal bans on Russia. So in April, metal, aluminum, copper, and nickel were all banned. Any imports into the United States were banned, but it doesn't necessarily ban like U.S. businesses from doing trades with them as long as it's not importing. So understanding that gray area or like what's going on there can be very tricky and hard to understand and like deal with. So.
So can you elaborate more on that? I'm thrown through a loop. They can acquire it, purchase it, but as long as it's not imported. So how does that work then?
Well, as long as it's going to a different country, it's fine.
Okay, there's an intermediary in
the
between.
United States itself. So, but I mean, it plays more widely into the issue of death by like 1,000 cuts. Like there's open up little loopholes in the thing because the verbiage isn't exactly what it says on there. So, and that's one of the big issues is that these orders are generally super subjective and open to interpretation. So it can be kind of can be variable on what your opinion on how it should be applied is. And that creates a lot of issues between banks and their clientele. So that's one area. Um, Kind of going off of that complexity, sanctions aren't new, but they've really come into like a major like role at banks only in the past couple of years. So there's only been recently like a lot more people who need to work in the sanction space, but there isn't quite enough like experience there. So it's hard to find like really like sanction specific. You can always find like AML or fraud or KYC people who are able to join on, but to get like that really advanced like sanction level to really look and understand those like complex situations, that can be pretty difficult to find. Uh, and that's just simply because like we're in a new space and a comparatively new space in that. So, and with that as well, I don't I've kind of noticed there isn't quite enough coordination between various teams on that level yet, between like the sanctions and MFD teams, and how I've dealt with things in terms of like there isn't enough coordination where, hey, like there's a sanctions issue or there's a potential AML issue. There because they all see different like transactions at different times, and the various teams see things in like see different forms of data in different ways. So we see like individual transactions generally, or we typically don't see like groups or we're focused on like individual transactions or clients, but there might be a picture that we should be made aware of. And uh, I think a lot of banks are kind of struggling. What's going like, how do we handle this? Like, where do we bring people together, and how do we coordinate with effectively this like new like larger group?
So, yeah, I'm just thinking about that of I know on the AML side, like we see larger patterns like over months or weeks or et cetera. But definitely I don't feel like there's a lot of cohesion of like knowing what OFAC does on a day-to-day besides like just clearing out possible matches. I haven't thought about that aspect, so it's interesting.
Well, and I've noticed as well that there seems to kind of be a misconception on sanctions of a lot of people kind of see it as simple work and easy work, and it's not really, especially nowadays. It's become increasingly difficult, and there's a lot of varying layers that go into sanctions, especially now with Russian-Ukrainian war, other global conflicts. Uh, so um, I think that's another misconception. Our job's a lot more complex. We don't get to deal with that like than people think. So
Yeah. No, I agree too. I think there's room for collaboration. Um, Obviously, the size of your institution really impacts that definitely. But if it's available, like if you're not too big, then why don't you capitalize on that? So that's I feel the same way.
but as you were saying about the coordination, and that's actually another kind of issue that comes in with the dealing with sanctions is that really only banks of like particular, only the larger banks are going to have like formal sanctions teams. Um, so the people like lots of experience are going to generally be like all at the top, are all going to be at the largest banks. So if you get into like the more medium or smaller ones, there's just going to be less experience to go around because
That makes sense.
again, up until now, yeah, you really kind of need to be a particular size before you start getting like those separate teams, at least from how I've in discussions I've had with like people who've worked at smaller banks and such. Um, like sanctions teams don't really come into play until larger banks. So that helps. That also plays into the issue of finding like really experienced sanctions people.
So OFAC sanctions positions you think would be more closer on, but overall, like more closer on like an entry level role, obviously depending on the size of the institution, and as you spoke to, that there are more comprehensive, sophisticated, maybe supervisory roles, or specialists, right? Maybe you're just a specialist of Russia, Ukraine, or oligarchs or something. But for the most part, though, it sounds like this role, and honestly, in my experience, reviewing job openings across financial crimes compliance, I feel like OFAC specialists or sanction specialist roles traditionally are a little bit more on the entry level.
Definitely a lot of the like specialist level ones are going to be on the entry level for sure. So, as I've said, like up until I will be honest, up until more recently, like sanctions has been a lot simpler. It's more just been the addition of Russia and Ukraine, and the Israel-Gaza war that have really kind of expanded the uh, situation and made things a lot more complex. So, um, because of like there's an increased global scale of Russian sanctions in particular, and that kind of spread to third countries, that is something that like is creating an increasing issue at a lot of banks, from what I've spoken about with various people. So, and kind
So
of how to handle those.
would you say, or what, I guess what would your opinion be, Skylar? Do you think if from political landscape, do you think that it would be just simpler times? Like if there was just a change in certain like the political everything basically at the moment, if sanctions would be reduced, or if, I mean, like do we see that going down in the future anytime soon?
That's actually a really good question. Actually, that would be another issue, I would say. Not so much in terms of sanctions going away. They are definitely now the preferred like foreign policy response to hostile entities or governments, because they're pretty effective, and uh, then you don't have to send troops in basically. So they're doing the economic damage for you and defeating the enemy or making them weak enough where they're no longer an issue. Um, but on that, they are subject to executive orders, which means that anytime there is a change, the foreign policy goals change and kind of what the situation is. So, and those can change on a dime. Like right now, I would say with the upcoming election, there's probably a good chance that we will see significant changes. Regardless, we will see further sanctions continued, but again, these things drop on the dime. Like it could be um, we have a new president, and then a week into his office, he comprehensively sanctions an entire country. So this can be one of our issues again, is just the speed and rapid pace that things can change in the blink of an instant. Mind you, sanctions like operate in like days, like a day or day time scale. So very little time these like to be fully deployed and all that. Like the minute like an executive order is sent out, there's usually like a round of sanctions to go with that as well, and then they'll continue building on that sanctions order as well. So if you have to constantly be on your feet, and that can definitely be a bit stressful for some people.
Yeah, I think that sanctions OFAC role responsibilities, it's kind of unique because of those external factors. There's so many external factors that impact what happens on a day to day, and in comparison, like if you work in AML or KYC, you're obviously stopping illicit activity, preventing illicit activity, but you're also mostly just making sure that you're staying compliant with your federal regulator. And those kind of compliance baselines, don't change all that often, or it's minor alterations or updates. So
You can anticipate it as well because you're having those conversations about risk and everything. Where it sounds like sanctions. That sounds like it keeps you on your toes for sure, which is interesting.
Yeah, basically, like, I mean, sanctions you could say is you don't know till you know.
Fair enough. There we go. All right, we'll roll on here to the last question. Then we have question 5. Can you describe briefly how you got into the financial crimes career space and what tips would you recommend for those looking to get into the industry?
So yeah, I probably have a bit more unusual background in terms of getting into financial crimes. I actually started in politics, and I worked on a few campaigns during college before uh, that. So that got me more into the government sphere, and then from there I was like, don't really want to go into government, so uh, I'm going to try finance instead. And so I started looking around and saw contracting positions at a company that contracts AML analysts, entry-level AML analysts to various banks and stuff. So I applied there and got the job and discovered I was really interested in it. Um, that was really helpful because I got a pretty broad range of experience in only a few years. And also, I mean, just having that experience, that makes it easier for me to apply like AML knowledge I learned in like AML or KYC to my daily work and sanctions, and it's helpful for me in understanding because I can see broader patterns and blah blah blah. So and moving there, that's how I got there. Um, in terms of what I've noticed in terms of getting into the financial crimes enforcement industry, at a bank here, I've noticed there seems to be like three ways, which is either go through work as a contractor first, basically, work your way up through the bank into that position, or you can go to a different law enforcement agency, usually one where you have to do investigations, somewhere like a detective or like the FBI or something like that, and then you can move into the banking that role at a bank. So I what I thought was helpful was going the contractor route myself. I think from my point of view, it was the quickest, and I got the broadest range of experience directly in the field, which it can be kind of hard to find like that experience like right off the bat. Like it's it's not easy to find an entry level AML job, and most, if not all, banks won't really hire you in that position because it does require a pretty high degree of like investigations and thinking and other critical skills. So like they're not always the easiest to train into. So um,
What
in terms of
what was your education in?
I have two degrees. One's in law and one's in economics.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, I that's kind of what also drew me in here is that I have a pretty good like background or comparative area for like the financial crimes enforcement sector, because I have that law degree and the econ degree, so I understand finance and law, which is helpful in our position as well in like analyzing and interpreting legal documents and how they apply to financial institutions, and then general patterns and other things at like a financial institution that occur. So
Yeah, but the sad truth though is, despite you having those two, degrees and the educational experience, you still wouldn't have ended up at a bank, um, and unless until you've taken that contract role, because as anybody knows in this space, as you said too, it's difficult to get into for whatever reason that may be. But we talk about on here, FinCrime Insiders, about how these roles will say we want 2, 3, 4, 5 years experience in banking, two of those years in investigations, and then with some sort of higher education in addition to it. And then you very rarely hit all those, and these are entry level roles to lead off, right? These are entry level roles at like a traditional finance institution. So it's very difficult to get into because you usually just get disqualified for not meeting all those requisites. But the minute that you get, it could be probably 3.5 days of experience at a place that does some sort of anti-money laundering or financial crimes compliance work, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, he's qualified now. So it's kind of quite a redundancy, but
exactly. And I definitely agree on that. Like, it's getting your foot in the door that's really hard because, like, getting the contracting position is, from my point of view, probably the easiest option, because there's a lot more steps involved with going up through the bank or through a financial institution or going through a different agency because you have to get applied and you have to move through positions at both of those first into a role that is considered comparable to what you do in the financial crimes enforcement. So, like at a bank, from how I've seen things, is that generally you have to like become more of like a you have to work in operations usually, or like
Yeah.
dealing with transactions, and then you can kind of move more into like uh, usually fraud or maybe sanctions. It's pretty rare that I see like people who aren't like who haven't already like conducted intensive investigations work in AML on my end and all the banks I worked at. But sanctions will sometimes sanctions teams sometimes will fraud will if you have like more transactional stuff. So experience.
Yeah.
Or again, but like I said, those are all like there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through to get into this role. So that being said, though, on certifications, I don't think they're really necessary until you're actually into the industry itself and you're actually like doing the work and you like it. They're not going to be an immediate roadblock, especially for lower level positions. You're probably going to want it for like a more senior position, but for lower positions, it's not really something that's going to be necessary. You're better off waiting and making sure that you have several years of experience before you go for them. At least from that's how I've thought about it and from what I've seen in my
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah. Hey, yeah, that's why we ask everybody that question. So you could feel exactly how you want, and people will respect it, or take it with a grain of salt as they will. But that's good view on everything, and I think it aligns closely with what we've talked about on here already. Lauren, what do you got on it?
I like your first. I think I like your your way into the field, basically, like on campaigns and stuff. I think that's neat. I haven't heard that from anyone else. And then I agree with your certification comment. Like, I think it's something that's good if you think you're going to kind of be in the field for a while and if you like it and you want to progress. But yeah, it's not necessarily like a roadblock. There's so many other roadblocks to get into the industry, and it's not that those certifications. So
Exactly. Like, I mean, the financial crimes industry, like, we have entry level jobs, but I don't know if I'd really call them like true entry level jobs. Like,
yeah, I wouldn't either. They're called entry level, but they're so difficult to get into because you need years and years of
yeah,
experience to get the like junior position. So
I mean, to be fair, I mean, the job does require a pretty intensive, like, critical thinking skills in a lot of those. So you want to be able to prove that you can already do those in a job setting, at least in my opinion, before you move on to that, especially in terms of the amount of information that banks deal with and just kind of I'm dealing with money and finances and all that. I think it is important that the people that are hired at said banks in these positions do know what they're doing and that they can adequately perform the job. So it is hard hoops, but I do think they're there for a good reason.
yeah.
Then there's anomalies, and you meet people along the way, and they're like, I just stumbled into somebody's office, and they said, hey, you want a job? You're like, wait, what? How'd that happen again? But hey, it's out there, anything's a possibility in this space.
Exactly.
All right, yeah. One last note before we get concluded here. To that note of certifications, things like that. That's the whole idea of FinCrime Insiders is just to bring the knowledge to people that are in the industry and people that are looking to get into the industry. No offense to any of these organizations, but the Association Certified Fraud Examiners, ACAMS, I mean ACFCS, they produce good material. They have obviously industry recognized certifications, but at the end of it, their business to kind of a cash grab, honestly, in order for you to maintain your membership with them, and that certification costs a pretty penny, honestly, on most of them. and then, of course, the continuing professional education that's required in order to maintain that active membership certification on top of your annual dues. It kind of adds up. So I think you made a really good point there, Nathan. As far as the certifications, you should probably hold off to make sure that this is exactly what you want to do. I mean, it is an investment up front, and if you believe truly in yourself, go for it. Definitely, that's my personal opinion. It's not going to hurt anything except your wallet. So I guess that's probably what you want to consider.
Exactly. And that's the thing. Like, I mean, as I said, it's better. I mean, I have my ACAMS myself, so I am interested in staying in this area for a long time. But this is definitely something that you want to like make sure and think out before you go for it. It also, I mean, the examinations are pretty hard, so they do require a lot of studying and a lot of intensive effort put towards them. So you do want to make sure before you go for them that you're really prepared that you want to, and that you're ready to go for it.
Yeah, it does cost money to retest. All right, go ahead and roll on here then. Let me get this back up here. Yeah, once again, super grateful for you coming on here, Nathan. It was awesome talking about OFAC and sanctions, a little bit different topic than what we've done these first few episodes here. And we'll lead on here. Each of us have a LinkedIn. I even grabbed some pictures this go around here, so you get to see some handsome, pretty, smiling faces to go along. Definitely reach out to us on LinkedIn, send a connection request. I know that LinkedIn's been actually pretty adamant on making sure you know who's sending that request, obviously because of all the scams and fraud that goes on nowadays. But then again, it's kind of just like cold calling your professional network and you're trying to build it. So I personally don't mind if anybody sends me a cold connection request. I will do my own due diligence, make sure you are a real human being and not a fraudster. But definitely, I'm open to receiving some connection requests here. You can find myself, Lauren, or Nathan on LinkedIn here. And with that, we'd like for you all to like, subscribe, share, and comment to our YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/FinCrime Insiders. You can visit our website as well, where we do have the audio files of our episodes on there. That's www.fincrimeinsiders.com. And a huge shout out to our subscribers so far. We are at 51. We broke over 50. Super grateful for all the support everybody's given us and just the time of day. Hopefully you all are enjoying this as much as me. And of course, if you are a financial crimes compliance professional and would like to be spotlighted on FinCrime Insiders, just as Nathan did and as Lauren does almost every time with me, please reach out to us at our email. It'll be listed in the description of this video. Otherwise, it is fincrimeinsiders@gmail.com. And with that, that's the conclusion of episode 5, FinCrime Insiders. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Nathan.